In the early October of 1997, a woman dressed like she was headed to a fashion show walks into her local bank in Charlotte, North Carolina and asks the bank teller, quote, "How much can I deposit before you have to report it to the feds?" End quote. The bank teller keeps her reactions neutral and just replies, "As long as the deposits are under the daily limit of $10,000, it will be fine." And the woman understands every single word and starts depositing money just shy of 10 grand on a daily basis, which obviously raised suspicion, and the bank filed a suspicious activity report. This incident took place just a few days later of the second largest heist in the history of America, when a Loomis Fargo cash depot supervisor decided to rob his own employer, successfully stole over $17 million in cash and fled. However, when lust, betrayal, greed, and lack of control over extravagant buying impulses kicked in, one of the greatest heists of the time turned into the dumbest heist in the history of America. On the evening of October 4th, 1997, a Loomis Fargo and Company supervisor, David Scott Gant, ends his shift for the day but stays back at the cash depot, stating he needs to take care of some unfinished business while his partner leaves for the day. David, who had been working for the company for almost 3 years, being paid $8.15 per hour for driving the Loomis truck, carrying incredible risk and responsibility with him and without any insurance from the company, completely snaps and decides to change his life forever. He simply walks to the cash wall door, which he had an official access to, opens the door, and starts filling as much cash as he can in the back of the company van and flees the depot with over $17.3 million. But being underpaid was actually not the only reason that motivated Gant to steal the money. He was highly motivated because a young woman promised him that she'll leave her boyfriend and move to Mexico with him, living a life of luxury if he manages to pull off this heist successfully. And the idea of stealing the money started at least a year before the actual heist, when this young woman started seeing David almost every day, drilling $1 million dream into David's head, and this is how it all started. 1 year before the heist, a young woman named Miss Kelly Campbell joins the Loomis regional office where David Gant worked as the vault supervisor. After joining, she's assigned to the same route as David, and both starts delivering cash around different banks in Charlotte. Sometimes later, David, who was already married to a different woman, starts catching feelings for Kelly due to the fact that she was sweet and kind and spent most of the time with David during long work hours. One day, while having lunch in the break room, Kelly jokingly asks David, has he ever dreamt of becoming a millionaire and what he would do if he suddenly got rich? To this, David replies he'd take a long vacation somewhere in South America and start his own business. Kelly insinuates that it's such a weird feeling that they move millions of dollars every single day, but they can't even take a single cent out of it. She goes on by saying, let's just rob one of these trucks because just a few inches behind that metal sheet is a ticket to freedom. Hearing this, David completely disregards Kelly's imaginations and warns her never to bring such wild ideas to him ever if she doesn't want both of them to lose their jobs. However, after working at Loomis for almost a year, Kelly gets into a heated argument with her boss and is immediately fired from the job. David is assigned a new trainee, however, he couldn't shake the feeling of missing Kelly all the time. David's feelings for Kelly intensifies even more when she kisses him while leaving the office one last time and says, "I'll see you around, David." Angry, frustrated, and jobless, Kelly starts visiting her old friend and a former FBI informant, Steve Chambers. And one day, while hanging out with Steve and his wife at their trailer park home, they see a news on TV that a Loomis car driver in Jacksonville, Florida, stole more than $18 million from Loomis. However, due to his rookie mistakes, he was captured by the authorities. Inspired by the news, Steve tells Kelly with the proper planning and a team of professionals like Steve himself, they could successfully pull off the heist and would never get caught. Initially, Kelly disagrees with Steve's idea, stating that it's not a right thing to do. Steve tries to convince her for the heist, stating that the authorities would never doubt him because of his connections with the FBI and because of his insider knowledge of how to stay undetected. Kelly finally agrees to Steve's plan of robbing Loomis Fargo Cash Depot. She immediately comes up with David Gant's name, stating that he still works at Loomis as the supervisor and has 24/7 access to the vault, and also that David and she hangs around very frequently, and she thinks David is head over heels for her. Steve requests Kelly to arrange a meeting between the two, and within a few days, Kelly calls David and asks him to meet her at a local cafe. And in a heartbeat, David agrees to meet her. At the cafe, Kelly tells David that she's been thinking about the heist a lot and also about the dream of moving together to Mexico. And David, being the supervisor authorized with complete access, it could be a very simple in-and-out job without even triggering any alarm. Hearing all the sweet words from Kelly, in David's mind, $1 million dream with his dream girl suddenly started to feel not far from the reality. This is when Kelly introduces Steve Chambers to David, stating the man sitting behind her will make the arrangements and has already created a master plan for the heist. Steve doesn't show his face and introduces himself as Geppetto. They discuss how and when the heist will be executed, and the mission to become ridiculously rich is finally put into action. October 4th, 1997, Charlotte, North Carolina. At around 6 p.m. in the evening, David Gant and his new trainee arrive back at the cash depot from their full-day shift. David parks his truck inside the facility while his trainee starts closing down all the gates because that day it was their turn to close down the facility after their shift ended. As his trainee walks towards the exit to punch out his shift, he turns around and questions David what was he waiting for. David replies, "You go ahead, I've got few pending entries to make which would take another hour to finish the job." The trainee buys into David's lie and leaves for the day. A few blocks down the main street, Steve Chambers, his two accomplices, and Kelly Campbell wait in a car on the lookout for police cars or if any employee suddenly shows up at the facility. Kelly radios David, waiting for instructions standing in the facility, stating that it was all clear and he can proceed with the mission. Inside the facility, David Gant walks around to make sure it was all clear and he was all alone, and finally makes his move and starts walking towards the wall door. He quickly swipes his access card, unlocks the wall door, and swings it wide open. And there it was, hundreds of millions of dollars sitting just a few feet away that was going to change his life forever. However, suddenly, a rush of honesty takes over David's thoughts and he radios back to his team stating he can't do it and it's not a right thing to do. To this, Kelly replies that she respects his honesty and loyalty, but both of those things have not taken him far in life anyway, and now was his chance to reap the rewards of his dedication and hard work. Again, hearing Kelly's words on the radio, David snaps back into action and quickly starts loading pallets of cash on the cart and starts loading them in the company's van. He takes around 2 hours to load up more than $17 million until there was no more space to cramp any more cash. Once he was satisfied with what he had just done, he does a little dance to take some pride into believing how smart and daring he was. Then he walks over to the office cabin, which also had surveillance system installed in a locked cabinet. He simply unlocks the cabinet, pulls out the VHS tapes that recorded his every move, throws them in the back of the van, opens the roller door, and simply drives out of the facility without tripping a single alarm. Then David takes the van to a printing business called Reynolds & Reynolds in Northwest Charlotte as instructed by Steve Chambers. After almost 15 minutes, Steve, his accomplices, and Kelly arrive at the parking lot. One of the accomplices asks for the keys to the van, and David hands over a ring of 200 keys to him, quickly gets into Kelly's car, and both drive off to a small gas station. When Steve and his partners try to open the van, they realize David didn't tell them which key belonged to the van. So they spent another crucial half an hour in an open parking lot trying over 200 keys, and in a desperate attempt even try to break the glass, unbeknownst to the fact that armored vehicles have bulletproof glass. After a while, they finally find the right key and gain access to the van, and quickly starts packing the money into blue barrels they brought with them in their own vehicle. After a while, they take the money back to their trailer park home in Lincoln County. According to the plan, immediately after the heist, David changes his clothes at the gas station and takes around $20,000, which was within the legal limits of carrying money across the border. Kelly drives David to the airport, wishing him good luck and assuring him she would be joining him within a few days in Mexico. David boards a plane and flees directly to Cozumel, Mexico. Back in America, Steve Chambers declares he would be taking control of all the money and would not allow anyone to spend it irresponsibly to attract any attention. However, the very next day, Steve's wife, Michelle, asks him to buy her a small blouse and a skirt just to celebrate their success. Just one little thing for becoming millionaires. And that's exactly what they do. They go inside and few hours later come out walking like a whole shopping mall. And they don't just stop there. They go to a BMW dealership and buy their favorite BMW in cash, and a few days later, a few more luxury cars. Steve Chambers, who insisted everyone to stay low and not blow through a ton of cash, couldn't follow his own advice. They also move out of their trailer park home in Lincoln County after purchasing a luxury mansion in Cramerton for almost $635,000, also in cash. Chambers' actions were the complete opposite of the classic textbook advice of what not to do after stealing $17 million of federal money. And unequivocally now, it wasn't even the question of if, but when the whole gang would be brought to justice due to their dumber-than-a-box-of-rock actions. The following Monday, when the Loomis Fargo office opened and when other employees could not access the vault and couldn't find the key bunch to multiple locks at the facility, they quickly called the FBI, suspecting someone might have broken into the facility. They also find the unmarked company van was missing and all other employees were present at the depot except David Scott Gant, which immediately marked Gant as a prime suspect. And it took the authorities not more than 10 minutes to figure when they looked through CCTV recordings and find that the tapes were missing. However, David forgot to take out the tapes for 2 cameras that recorded his every move inside the vault. And at this point, it was crystal clear that it was David Scott Gant, the supervisor of the Loomis Fargo facility, who stole more than $17 million of federal money. The FBI quickly swung into action to look for David Gant. They went directly to his house and interrogated his wife about his whereabouts and find that David has not returned home since his yesterday's shift. In Mexico, David, with $20,000 cash, which was almost his annual salary, was living lavishly in luxury hotels, strolling on the beaches, and taking jet ski lessons. At this point, the FBI could not establish any possible locations David could have fled to. And during the time, Charlotte was filled with thousands of out-of-town crowd due to the UAW GM 500 NASCAR race that took place just one day after the heist. This added another layer of complexity in finding Gant, as most of the hotels, motels, and car rentals were booked by NASCAR enthusiasts. Many FBI agents believed that the heist was intentionally planned one day prior to NASCAR event because the perpetrators knew the city would be flooded with people that would help them blend in easily and would buy them more time to move the money quickly, making FBI's job more difficult. Steve Chambers also used the NASCAR event as an incredible opportunity to launder as much money as possible using sports betting. Therefore, the FBI started looking internally, talking to other employees to find any clue which could possibly put their investigation in motion. And one employee, David's new training partner, told the FBI that he was the replacement of an ex-employee, Kelly Campbell, and it also seemed that they were really close to each other. With the help of company records, they tracked down Kelly's residence and questioned her about any information regarding David or the heist. And Kelly blatantly denies everything about David's whereabouts or the heist, mentioning she wasn't even in the town when the robbery took place. However, a few days later, the FBI received a suspicious financial activity report from a local bank where a woman was constantly visiting the bank, depositing around $9,500 every single day. At the bank, the authorities find that the account was in the name of Michelle Chambers but could not find enough evidence that will link her daily deposits to the Loomis heist, David Gant, or Kelly Campbell. Few residents in the Kramer Mountain area started reporting about their new neighbors who moved in just a few days ago, stating that their extravagant spending behavior does not reflect a common expenditure pattern of a well-established person, and it seemed that these people might have suddenly gotten rich somehow and don't know anything about managing finances. With this crucial insight, the FBI quickly tracked down Chambers' mansions and are able to establish a possible link between their newly purchased property and unusual deposits in the bank. But still, there was no proof that the mansion or the money deposits would have come from the Loomis heist. Within a few days, Steve Chambers gets the information that David Gant made a stupid mistake of leaving a VHS tape in the facility that ultimately blew his cover, and therefore he made a plan to cut ties with Gant so that the authorities could not link him to the heist. He hires a hitman and sends him directly to Mexico to end David's story once and for all. In Mexico, the hitman is able to locate David, where he gets involved in a small chase. However, David successfully evades him and goes into the hiding. At this point, David had gone completely dry because of his careless spending spree, and according to Steve's master plan, was waiting for Chambers to send more money to him along with Kelly Campbell. However, unfortunately, David had no idea that Chambers never intended to send any money to David in the first place, and he just used David for his access to money and used Kelly as well as an emotional manipulator, like a classic honey trap. And Loverboy David fell for all of it. Within a few weeks, Kelly gets in touch with David using a payphone and warns him that Steve wants to end his story. David tells everything about his situation and also asks Kelly to inform Steve that if he does not receive $6 million within a few days, he will surrender to the Interpol. Back in Charlotte, the FBI hits 2 jackpots at once. They're able to trace a phone call conversation between Kelly and David, which gives away David's current location, Kelly's possible involvement in the heist, and one of the biggest evidence when one day Michelle Chambers goes to her bank to make another deposit but forgets to tear off the packaging band from the bundle, which still had the Loomis Fargo tape wrapped around it. After almost 4 months of manhunt connecting dots, the FBI finally had enough evidence to bring the perpetrators of the Loomis Fargo heist to justice. Back in Mexico, David, being helpless and worried for his life, loses all the interest in money and starts realizing Kelly Campbell just tricked him and played with his heart to commit this crime. She never intended to move to Mexico with him anyway. On March 1st, 1998, as David walks out of his hotel, 3 men surround him and ask him, quote, "Are you David Scott Gant?" end quote. David completely freezes, and instead of saying yes or no, he replies, "Please tell me you are the FBI, and if you are, please arrest me, sir. We need to talk." End quote. Unfortunately, they were the FBI. David Scott Gant was arrested in Mexico, was in safe hands, returning back to Charlotte, North Carolina. Meanwhile, in Charlotte, Steve Chambers, Michelle Chambers, Kelly Campbell, and 2 more accomplices are arrested immediately for the Loomis Fargo heist. During the flight, one of the agents asks David what really forced him to pull off an arguably the largest heist in America, and David Gant replies, quote, "If you could believe this, I only kissed her once, and it turns out to be a pretty expensive kiss." End quote. Almost 21 people, along with main heist members who agreed to safekeep the loot, were trialed and sentenced to serve in federal prison. In the end, David Gant lost everything except his wife, who stood by his side until the very end, divorcing him when David was asked again in the prison would he commit such a crime again if he ever gets a chance, to which he replies, quote, "Yeah, opportunity like that comes around once in a lifetime." End quote.